She checked into room 211 without a reservation during the quietest snowfall of the season. No ID, no luggage, just a name that made the night clerk pause. He didn't know then that letting her in would change everything, not just for him, but for the little girl asleep behind the lobby wall. Before we begin, if you believe in stories that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after the last word, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartwarming stories to life every week. Now let's begin. Single dad took the night shift. Then a mysterious guest arrived and asked for room 211, with him. The rain came down in sheets that blurred the edges of the world. From behind the front desk of the Crestwood Inn, David Harper watched as headlights flickered through the downpour, then disappeared behind the soaked curtain of night. He adjusted the thermostat out of habit, even though he knew the lobby was already warm. Behind the desk, the soft glow of a desk lamp cast a cone of light over a photo frame. Lily, 7, beaming in her Halloween fairy costume. A tooth missing. Joy unmistakable. He smiled, but the expression didn't linger. Not on nights like this. David took the late shift most evenings, partly for the quiet, partly because it allowed him to keep Lily in the small staff lounge behind the desk where she did her homework and fell asleep watching cartoons on mute. He checked the time, 10:42 p.m. Late, but not unusually so. Then the front door opened. The bell above chimed delicate and sharp. A woman stepped in from the storm, wearing a long beige coat, now soaked through at the shoulders, her hood partially up, shadows obscuring half her face. She carried no luggage. David stood the hotelier and him switching on automatically. "Evening," he said, soft but clear. "Rough weather tonight. Can I help you?" The woman lowered her hood. Her face was pale, the kind of pale that didn't come from the rain but from something deeper, absence. Weariness, something lived in and unshaken. Her eyes, a washed gray blue, were steady but unreadable. She walked up to the counter with the quiet deliberateness of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "Yes," she said, her voice calm but distant. "I'd like room 211. Please." David blinked. He kept a mental map of the inn's 16 rooms, most of them basic and forgettable. Room 211 was technically still on the roster but had been unused for years after a burst pipe led to an expensive repair job no one had ever followed through on. Maintenance eventually got the bathroom functional, but for reasons he couldn't explain they just never reopened it to guests. "I'm sorry," he said slowly. "Room 211 isn't usually rented out. It's not listed." Her gaze didn't waver. "I understand, but I'd still like it. Just for one night, if it's not too much trouble." David hesitated. The computer showed a near-empty registry. No real reason to say no. He studied her again. No makeup, no perfume. Slight tremor in her hand as she tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. Not dangerous, not unstable, just off-center. Like someone who hadn't felt safe in a long time. He exhaled. "All right, just a moment." She nodded, and only then did her eyes drift to the photo frame on the desk. Her breath caught so subtly he almost missed it. "Is that your daughter?" she asked, voice softer than before. David looked over his shoulder at the picture. "Yeah, that's Lily." A long pause. "She's beautiful." He smiled faintly, fingers tapping the keyboard as he reactivated room 211's profile. "She is," he agreed. When he handed her the key, her fingers brushed his. Ice cold. "Thank you," she said. "Let me know if you need anything," David replied. "There's extra blankets in the room. Heat kicks in slow, but it'll get there." She nodded and turned her shoes, squeaking slightly on the tile floor. As she passed through the hallway and vanished around the bend, something in David's chest stirred uneasily. Not fear, not even suspicion. Something older. A pull. Like a puzzle piece nudging into place somewhere deep in his subconscious. Then, from behind the half-closed door of the staff lounge, Lily stirred. Her voice was sleepy, small. Dad David stepped over and opened the door gently. Hey, you're still up. She rubbed her eyes. Was someone here? Just a guest checking in? What's her name? David paused. Didn't ask. Lily tilted her head. That's weird. You always ask. He knelt beside her and pulled the blanket up over her shoulders. Guess I forgot. She leaned against him, her forehead pressed into his shoulder. Okay. Night Daddy. He kissed her hair. Night Bug. Back at the front desk, David reopened the registration record, curious now. He scrolled through the line where name and ID usually went. Blank. He checked the surveillance feed's standard angle hallway shot. The woman was standing outside room 201, hand on the doorknob. But she wasn't going in. She was staring at the number plate. Her lips moved, barely visible. David leaned closer to the screen. Then she turned, looked straight into the lens of the camera like she knew exactly where it was, and smiled. Not threatening, not mocking, just haunting. He sat back slowly, heart-tapping once then again. Room 211. She hadn't asked for any amenities, no questions, no bags, just that room. And for one strange, disquieting second, David had the inexplicable sensation that she knew far more about this place about him than he knew about her. The storm raged louder against the windows, but the lobby had gone still. Behind the desk, the cursor blinked next to the blank name field. David typed in 2 words before locking the system. Unknown guest. And deep inside the hallway room 211 finally clicked shut. The morning light bled gently through the blinds of room 211, casting long golden slats across the worn carpet and muted walls. The silence inside was heavy, not oppressive, but contemplative, like the hush of a cathedral after the last hymn fades. Ella Morgan sat on the edge of the bed, still in her coat, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. She hadn't slept. In her lap, her fingers twisted a small silver ring, dull with age. She turned it over and over. The inside was engraved, barely legible now, Hope. Always. She whispered the name aloud as if it needed air to stay alive. Hope? It wasn't what they named her in the adoption papers, she knew that. But it was the name she gave her daughter, soft, fierce, defiant. A name whispered into the warmth of a newborn's ear while doctors and orderlies looked away. The only thing she was ever allowed to give her child. And now she was here in a room she hadn't entered before, but which somehow felt like it had waited. Like time had slowed inside it, waiting for this one specific collision of souls. She rose, brushing down her coat, and stepped to the window. From here she could see the courtyard below. And there, near a rusted garden bench, a man knelt gently braiding a little girl's hair. The girl was laughing, arms flailing, as she tried to chase something, maybe a butterfly, maybe just the wind. The man caught her again, wrapped her up in a hug, and she squealed. Ella pressed her hand to the glass. Lily. She knew, not with logic, not through court documents or DNA or signed affidavits. She knew in the way a mother knows a child's scent, the way a storm knows the weight of rain. Tears slid quietly down her face. Down in the courtyard, David's back tensed. He didn't know why. Just a prickle, a sense that he was being watched, not in a threatening way, but in a way that felt intimate. Exposed. He looked up toward the second-floor window. A shadow moved. He let it go. Daddy Lily said between giggles, "Can we get a donut before school?" David grinned. Is that a question or a demand? Demand, she beamed. Well, I guess I have no choice then. They left for school shortly after. Ella remained at the window long after the car disappeared from the lot. When David returned mid-morning, the lobby was quiet. The rain from last night had dried into a soft mist, and sunlight filtered in through the high windows, making the room feel more alive than it had in weeks. The key for room 211 sat on the desk. No note, no checkout, no sign she had ever been there except for the key and the faint scent of lilacs. He moved to the security console and rewound the feed. There she was, early morning, walking softly down the hallway. No suitcase, just that long coat and a tired elegance. She paused near the desk, looked directly into the camera again. Then she smiled. Not haunting this time. Just gentle. Like forgiveness. That night, David sat with Peter, his best friend since high school, now the town's police chief, over greasy diner burgers and bad coffee. She asked for room 211. She knew about it. No one knows about that room, Pete. Peter raised a brow. Maybe she stayed there before. No, not possible. We stopped booking that room before I even got hired. Peter leaned back. What are you thinking I'm thinking? Something about her didn't add up, but not in a bad way. Like she knew more than I did, but didn't want to use it against me. Peter studied him a moment. You think she knew Lily David's fork stilled? I think. She recognized her. Silence. You ever think about where Lily came from? Peter asked carefully. David nodded slowly. Only every day. The next evening, just after sunset, a small package arrived at the inn. No return address. Inside was a children's book, hand-bound cloth cover, faded and soft. The title was stitched into the front in delicate thread, The Cloud That Came Back. David opened it. The first page was a handwritten dedication. For H. May you never forget how far love will chase you. His heart caught. He flipped through pages illustrated with watercolor clouds and forests. A little girl made of mist who gets lost only to be followed through mountains and rivers by a gentle wind that calls her name until she finds her way back. On the last page, beneath the final drawing, a single line was scrawled in familiar cursive. I used to tell her this story every night. David set the book down slowly. Every hair on his arm stood up. He walked to the back room where Lily was drawing on the floor with colored pencils. Hey, Bug, he said gently. Got something for you. She looked up, eyes bright. He handed her the book. She held it like treasure, flipped through the first few pages and gasped. I know this, she said. I know this story. David's breath stalled. Where did you hear it? He asked. I don't remember. I just do. She hugged the book to her chest. Can I keep it? He nodded. Of course. She disappeared into the lounge with it. David stood frozen in place. It wasn't possible. But it was. She remembered. Outside, the wind picked up. The last leaves of autumn danced across the parking lot, caught in spirals like tiny whispers. David stepped onto the front porch and looked down the road. No sign of the woman. No signature. No return address. Just a story woven into memory, sewn into love, and left behind like a breadcrumb on the path back to something long buried. Back to a name she hadn't spoken in 7 years. Hope. The quiet hum of the rental car engine did nothing to still the noise in Ella's mind. She sat in the vehicle across from the Crestwood Inn engine, idling headlights off hands clenched so tightly around the steering wheel her knuckles had gone pale. She had told herself she wouldn't come back. One night. That was the plan. She would see her confirm that Lily was alive healthy, and if fate were kind happy. Then disappear. Forever, if needed. But Ella Morgan had never been good at goodbye. Not when it mattered. She stared across the parking lot toward the front desk window. Light spilled from it like a warm invitation. Inside, she imagined David was reading or tidying up, keeping his hands busy to distract a mind that likely never truly rested. She didn't hate him. That surprised her. In her fantasies, delirious dreams on long European nights where loneliness pressed like fog, she had imagined the man who raised her daughter with 100 faces. Some cruel, some negligent, some forgettable. But never this. Never kind eyes, never steady hands, never someone who made Hope Lily laugh with her whole chest. Ella exhaled and looked down at the folder in her passenger seat. The file was thin-aged, frayed at the corners like a wound never allowed to fully close. It bore the seal of Durham County's Child Protective Services and a paperclip holding an old hospital bracelet. Baby Morgan, 07 to 14. Her hands trembled. She flipped the file open again for the 1,000th time. 7 years earlier. The hospital room had smelled of antiseptic and lavender lotion. Ella had insisted on bringing her own. One act of rebellion against the clinical sterility of her forced stay. She was 28, smart, finishing her master's in early childhood development. But none of that mattered when the test turned positive and the father vanished into silence. Her parents, devout and image pristine in social standing, called in favors. Her mother used words like temporary guardianship and mental health hold. Her father wrote checks that made records disappear. Ella, weakened after a long labor, was declared emotionally unfit to parent her daughter before she had even held her properly. The baby was whisked away to a safer place. Ella had screamed that day, screamed until her throat bled and nurses threatened sedation, but no one listened. No one stayed. They named the baby Hope only on her private, handwritten notes. The legal records never reflected it. To the world, her daughter became a case number, and just like that, she was gone. Ella stared at the photo tucked in the file. Grainy, black and white. A scan of the only official image she had managed to find from the adoption archives. A 6-month-old baby in a county crib, cheeks full, fingers curled, eyes wide with unknowing. For years after that, Ella spiraled. Not just grief, but gaslighting grief. The kind where the people closest to you insist nothing wrong ever happened, that your pain is imagined, that you should be grateful for being spared the burden of motherhood. She checked into a clinic in Geneva at 29, stayed for nearly 4 years. Not because she was insane, but because she couldn't live in a world that called her grief delusion. But healing doesn't ask permission. It creeps in quietly in the form of a good nurse, a poem under a pillow, a fellow patient who'd lost a son in war and didn't question her pain. And one day, Ella woke up and said, "I want to go home." Back in the States, the only thing she had to go on was a partial trail of where her daughter might have gone. Adoption agencies were sealed tight, but a kind clerk at the county archives, herself an adoptee, pointed Ella toward a handful of hospitals where a baby fitting Hope's profile had received treatment. It took 9 months. 9 months to narrow the list from 50 names to 1. A man named David Harper had applied for adoption 6 years earlier. He was a widower. No prior children. Lived in a modest house, worked nights. The girl he adopted, Lily, had no known relatives. Ella didn't care about legal guardianship anymore. She didn't want custody. She just needed to know her daughter hadn't vanished into the abyss. And now, she knew. A knock on the car window startled her. Ella jerked upright, heartbeat lurching, only to find a teenage boy, maybe 17, holding out a cup of coffee from a nearby food truck. She rolled the window down slightly. He smiled. Lady inside said, "This was for you. You've been sitting out here like a ghost for 20 minutes. Ella blinked. "Lady Barista. Said she saw you last night. Figured you'd come back." Ella hesitated. "Thank you." The boy handed her the cup, nodded, and walked away. She looked at the lid. A small heart was drawn in black marker. Beneath it, the word courage. Ella swallowed the lump in her throat. Sometimes the universe doesn't whisper. Sometimes it sends you teenagers with paper cups and bad handwriting. She opened the door and stepped out into the cold air, her coat wrapped tighter this time. She wasn't going to confront David. She wasn't going to demand anything. But she was done watching through glass. She was ready to stand in the light. As she crossed the street, her steps were tentative but firm, and behind her the first flurries of snow began to fall soft, almost invisible. Ella Morgan walked into the warmth of the Crestwood Inn for the second time, no longer anonymous. And this time she knew exactly why she was there. The hiss of the coffee machine filled the staff kitchen as David leaned against the counter, watching the slow drip fill his chipped mug. Outside, late autumn light painted the lobby in amber hues, and somewhere in the back room Lily was humming as she colored. David let the hum anchor him. It had been a strange few days. He hadn't heard from the woman again. No calls, No follow-up. Just the book, the story Lily swore she remembered without ever having heard it. The cloud that came back. It sat now on her nightstand like it belonged there, as if it had never left. As if it had always waited. David rubbed the bridge of his nose, his thoughts tangled. Then, as if summoned by memory, Peter stepped in through the side door, his police jacket unzipped, hair wind-blown. He dropped a box of donuts on the counter and poured himself a cup of the same awful coffee. "You ever sleep, Harper?" David chuckled, eyes tired. "Only when the coffee pot's empty." Peter leaned against the fridge, crossing his arms. "You said this woman. Ella showed up out of nowhere, asked for a room we haven't booked in years, and then mailed your daughter a book she somehow remembers." David nodded. "That about covers it. You still think it's coincidence I stopped believing in coincidence the day Lily walked into my life?" Peter was quiet for a moment, then nodded toward the doorway. "Tell me again, from the beginning, why you adopted her." David sipped his coffee. The memory came quickly, uninvited, but familiar like a scar with weather memory. 6 years ago, the hospital had been overrun with flu cases, holiday chaos, and short-staffed nurses. David had been volunteering there part-time, unable to return to full nursing work after the accident that took his wife. His therapist had encouraged service. "Give back what's hurting," she'd said. "Sometimes it softens when it's shared." That night he'd been delivering charts when he heard crying echoing from the pediatric wing. Not the usual baby's cry, sharp or scared, but not panicked. It was rhythmic, as if the child had given up on being heard and was just reminding the world she existed. He found her in a crib, alone. A nurse nearby explained casually that she'd been left in emergency foster care. The case was complicated family conflict, they said. A failed kinship adoption. No immediate relatives stepped forward. "She doesn't have a name yet," the nurse added. "Goes by Lily on the charts. No birth certificate processed." David looked down into the crib. The baby wasn't crying anymore. She was staring up at him. Her hands were balled into fists, but her eyes, there was no fear there. Just awareness. A knowing beyond her months. He reached in instinctively, letting her grab one finger. Her hand was warm, her grip fierce. And in that moment, something inside him cracked open a dam, a wall, a silence he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since Emily died. "I didn't mean to adopt her," David said now, voice low. "Not at first. I just kept visiting. Then one night they told me the foster agency couldn't place her. Not with her background. No medical history, no family claims, just a sealed file and a warning. She may have complications." Peter raised a brow. "She's the healthiest kid I've ever seen." David smiled. "I know." "She saved you," Peter said quietly. David nodded. "Every day since." Peter sat across from him. "So, what now? You think Ella's... What the birth mother, I don't know what I think. But the way she looked at Lily... It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. Are you going to tell Lily?" David sighed, staring into his cup. "She's too young. But one day. Yeah, I have to. She deserves to know." Peter leaned forward. "Just make sure when that day comes you remind her of one thing." "What's that?" "That love is not defined by blood. It's shown by who stays." Later that evening, David tucked Lily into bed, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek as she hugged her stuffed giraffe. "Daddy," she whispered. "Yeah, bug. Do you think clouds get lost?" He blinked. "What do you mean? Like in the story, when the cloud forgets where it belongs." David sat on the edge of the bed. "Maybe. But sometimes things that seem lost are just taking the long way home." She seemed to like that answer. She reached for his hand. "If I ever get lost, will you come find me?" His voice caught. "Always." She closed her eyes, content. And as David sat in the dim light watching his daughter breathe softly, the truth settled like the dust on the window pane. He didn't know what Ella Morgan wanted. Didn't know why now or what would come next. But he knew who Lily was. She was his daughter, not because of papers, not because of fate, but because the day she looked at him from that hospital crib something in him had promised. And David Harper was a man who kept his promises, even when they hurt, even when they were tested, especially then. Outside, the night deepened. Room 211 remained empty, its lights dark, its door closed. But in the quiet, something shifted, like the air itself knew that old ghosts were not gone. Just waiting. The wind was sharp that afternoon, the kind that made scarves flap like prayer flags and turned breath into steam. The front bell above the Crestwood Inn's door jingled lightly as it opened, letting in a gust of cold air and the soft patter of little footsteps. David looked up from behind the counter just as Lily skipped in from school, her cheeks rosy, her backpack bouncing on her back. "We had music today," she said, dropping her bag with theatrical exhaustion. "Mr. Sanderson let me be the conductor." David smiled. "That explains the jazz hands." Lily grinned, then plopped onto the old armchair near the fireplace, kicking off her shoes and pulling out her sketch pad. It was part of their routine now David's shift would begin. Lily would settle into the lobby's comfort zone like it was her own personal reading nook, and they'd both carry on orbiting each other in a rhythm that felt like family. David turned back to the computer, beginning to log inventory for the week. Then the door opened again. This time it was her, Ella Morgan. She was dressed plainly gray coat, dark jeans, a scarf wound tightly around her neck, but her presence brought with it a gravity that David felt before he even turned fully to look at her. His stomach tightened. Lily looked up. Her eyes widened. "Oh, hi," the little girl said cautiously. Ella's breath caught. "Hi." David stood measured. "Miss Morgan, I didn't mean to interrupt." Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "I was just passing through. Thought I'd drop something off." She held up a small paper bag folded neatly at the top. "Some books. From my collection. I thought maybe Lily might like them." David hesitated. Lily, ever curious, bounced off the chair and skipped over. "What kind of books?" Ella knelt slowly, holding the bag at Lily's height. "Ones about brave girls, adventurers, dreamers." Lily peeked inside and gasped. "Amelia Earhart. There's a real book about her." David stepped closer, protective but cautious. "Lily, why don't you go read at the desk for a bit, okay?" Lily clutched the books like treasure. "Thanks, miss, Ella," she said softly. Lily nodded. "Thanks, Miss Ella." David waited until Lily returned to the armchair, then turned to Ella with quiet intensity. "You need to tell me what this is," he said, voice low. "Why you're here. Why now?" Ella looked down at her gloved hands, then back at him. Her eyes shimmered. "I won't stay, I promise. But I had to see her. I didn't know how else. I didn't come to hurt either of you." David's jaw clenched. "Then what did you come for?" Ella exhaled shakily. "To be sure she's okay. To see it with my own eyes." David searched her face. There was no accusation there. No entitlement. Just a longing so raw, so utterly human that it pulled something taut inside him. "I think you should go," he said quietly. She nodded, but before she turned, Lily called out from her seat. "Miss Ella." Ella froze. "Can I read you something?" David's heart skipped. Ella looked at him uncertain, as if asking for permission. He didn't answer, only stood in silence as she approached the chair. Lily opened the cloud that came back the copy Ella had sent. She began to read aloud, her voice rising and falling like music. The little cloud wandered too far. She thought she'd be brave, but the sky was too big and she forgot how to find home. Ella's eyes filled with tears, but the wind chased her, whispering her name, not scolding, just calling her back, because even clouds get lost, and even wind forgives. Lily paused, looking up. "I like this part." Ella pressed a hand to her mouth. David finally moved, walking toward them, heart pounding with an ache he couldn't explain. "Where did you learn to read like that bug?" he asked gently. Lily shrugged. I don't know. It just feels like I already knew it. Ella rose slowly. I should go. David looked at her for a long moment, then said something he hadn't planned to say. You want to sit for a minute? She blinked. I don't want to confuse her. She's not confused, he said quietly. She's just kind. Ella looked at the girl who was now deeply engrossed in a picture of a girl flying an old plane. Then she sat on the edge of the opposite couch, still distant, but present. David remained standing the triangle between them, delicate as crystal. For 10 full minutes, no one spoke. The fire crackled softly. Outside, snow began to drift lightly in the dusk. Lily yawned, curled up on the cushion's book, still open on her chest. She looks like her Ella, whispered. David turned to her brows, furrowed. My grandmother. The eyes. She smiled faintly. She used to say we had sky-colored eyes. I never thought I'd see them again. There was no anger in her voice, no claim, only wonder. David sat down finally across from her. He studied her. Not just the grief in her eyes, but the strength, the stillness. You wrote that story, didn't you? Ella nodded. I used to whisper it to her in the hospital, before they took her. David rubbed his palms together, voice low. She's happy, Ella. She's loved. She's safe. I know, Ella said, wiping her cheek. I see that. Why now? Ella met his gaze. Because I couldn't live another day wondering if I'd done the right thing by walking away. I needed to know she landed somewhere soft. David looked back at the girl asleep beside the fire. She did, he said. They sat in silence again, not as strangers, but not yet as anything else. Just two people bound by the same small life, one they both had found and lost and found again. Outside, the dusk settled into night, and the wind curled softly against the window panes, whispering of things not broken but mended. Quietly. Together. It happened on a Tuesday. The kind of cold, brittle morning where frost etched patterns on windshields and breath came out in small clouds. Inside the Crestwood Inn, the heat was humming, and Lily had bundled herself up in her favorite sweater, the one with little foxes on it, and sat at the front desk with David coloring while he checked the reservation logs. They were supposed to stop for Coco after school. That was the plan. David remembered that, later, how normal it had all felt before the world tipped on its axis. At first it was subtle. Lily shifted in her seat, rubbed at her chest, and cleared her throat. Then she coughed once, twice. David looked over brow creasing. You okay, Bug? She nodded, but her face was pale. He stood up, walked over, crouched beside her. Her breathing was shallow. No wheezing yet, but close. Where's your inhaler? In my bag. He grabbed the small pink backpack, rummaging until his fingers found the plastic case. He pulled it out, clicked the cap, guided her through 2 puffs. But something was wrong. Her chest still rose too fast. Her lips had begun to pale. His calm cracked. David scooped her into his arms and carried her into the staff lounge, laying her gently on the couch. Stay with me, Lily. Just breathe. You're okay. You're okay. He reached for the backup medicine, a stronger dose kept in the emergency drawer. It was gone. Panic surged like electricity. He tore through the cabinet again. No vial, no nebulizer. He always kept a second one, but last week's snowstorm had delayed the refill delivery, and he'd meant to pick one up yesterday. But work had run long. And now Lily's fingers gripped his sleeve. She was scared. And so was he. Then the front door flew open. Ella stood there, her coat half unbuttoned, snow clinging to her boots. She'd just arrived for a quiet visit, another drop-off of books and soft gestures. But the moment she saw David's face through the glass, the panic in his eyes, she ran. Now she was standing in the hallway, seeing Lily collapsed on the couch, breath ragged and sharp. Without hesitation, she moved past David. Where's her emergency med? She asked. It's gone. I didn't realize Ella didn't wait. She dropped her bag and pulled out a slim, zippered pouch. Inside it a small vial and a nebulizer mouthpiece clean and sealed. Her hands moved fast, unwrapping, prepping priming. David watched in stunned silence. "How did you—" "She used to take this dosage," Ella said, kneeling beside Lily. "Twice a week, at the hospital. She was born with mild bronchial sensitivity. They said she'd grow out of it." David was frozen. Ella placed the mouthpiece to Lily's lips and flipped the switch. A soft hum filled the air as vapor began to mist. Lily's breathing fought, then softened. The color began to return to her cheeks. Her grip loosened. David sank to his knees, hands trembling. Ella sat motionless, steadying the device with one hand, her other gently stroking Lily's hair. "Easy, baby," she whispered. "I've got you." And in that moment, David heard it. The word, baby. Spoken so quietly, so reflexively, as if it had never left her mouth. As if it had never been taken from her. Minutes passed. The medication worked. Lily drifted into sleep, breathing steady now. The color in her face was warm again. David sat on the floor beside the couch, head bowed, one hand still gripping the empty inhaler like it might tell him why it hadn't been enough. Ella didn't move. She stayed there watching Lily, her expression unreadable. When David finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. "You knew the dosage. You had the exact vial." Ella nodded slowly. David looked at her, eyes filled with something between gratitude and confusion. How Ella didn't answer right away. She just stared at the sleeping child. Then she said quietly, "Because I used to be her mother." David's breath caught. "I mean, legally I never was. My parents, they handled it before the paperwork ever said she was mine. But I carried her. I named her. I held her for 9 hours before they sedated me." She looked at him then. "I wasn't crazy, David. I was devastated. And they used that against me." David's throat tightened. "Why didn't you come for her sooner?" Ella looked down at her hands. "Because I was broken. For a long time. And I was afraid that if I showed up I'd bring chaos. That it would undo everything she had." David didn't answer. He looked at Lily again, peaceful, safe. "Why now?" he asked. Ella's voice broke. "Because I couldn't live not knowing if she was okay. And when I saw her that first night, when I saw you, I realized she had something I'd never expected." He looked at her. "She had you," Ella said, "and she had joy." They sat in silence again. But it was different now. The silence wasn't distance. It was understanding. David reached out and took the nebulizer from her hands, turned it off, and set it aside. "She called you Hope," he said. Ella looked up. "The first time she read your story. She said, 'That cloud is me, and the wind sounds like my mom.'" Tears slid down Ella's cheek. "I told her that story in the hospital. Whispered it when no one was looking." "She remembers," David said. Ella covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. He didn't stop her. Didn't ask her to leave. Didn't claim Lily as only his. In that moment, under the soft hum of the heater and the muffled sounds of snow against the windows, they weren't rivals or threats. They were two people who had once lost the same thing. And now, somehow both had found their way back to it. Together. The snow had deepened overnight, muffling the world in silence. By morning, the landscape outside the Crestwood Inn was pure and untouched, the parking lot reduced to soft white drifts, and the skeletal trees crowned with crystal dust. Inside, David stood in the kitchen staring at the stove without really seeing it. The coffee pot had long since stopped dripping. His hands rested on the counter knuckles, pale, motionless. He had barely slept. Lily was upstairs, still recovering, still curled in the warmth of her blankets. Her breathing was normal again, her cheeks no longer pale. The emergency had passed. But inside David something hadn't settled. Ella's words echoed relentlessly. "I used to be her mother." It wasn't the revelation that haunted him. It was the sincerity in her voice. The calm. The raw, unpolished truth of it. Not an accusation. not a demand, just grief and love, and something he hadn't expected to feel understanding. When Ella returned to the inn the next morning, she didn't knock. She stepped through the lobby doors slowly, as if uncertain whether the warmth would still welcome her. David was waiting. He was seated in the same armchair Lily had once claimed as hers, a manila envelope resting on the table beside him. Ella's breath caught. "I thought maybe you wouldn't. I wanted to talk," David said gently. "Just us." Lily's still asleep. She nodded and approached. Her coat was dusted with snow and her hands were shaking slightly, but she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone ready to face what needed to be faced. David gestured for her to sit. She did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then David reached for the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of an intake form, Lily's original placement file from Child Protective Services. "I've read this a dozen times," he said, "and I never questioned it." She was categorized as an abandoned child with unknown parentage. No names, no family willing to step forward. Case closed. Ella stared at it. "They erased you," he said. "Not just legally. They erased you." Her eyes welled, but she didn't look away. "I begged them," she whispered. "When they said I had postpartum depression, I didn't fight. I should have. But I was 28. I'd just lost everything and the people I thought I could trust. They told me if I loved her, I'd walk away." She swallowed hard. "They told me I wasn't stable, that I wasn't enough, that I'd ruin her life." David's voice was quiet. "You believed them." "I had to," she said, her voice cracking, "because if I didn't, the guilt would have killed me. So I let them take her. And then I left the country before I could change my mind." David leaned back, breath-slow, shoulders heavy. "I've been angry," he admitted. "Not at you. I didn't know enough to be angry at you. But at the system. At the silence. For years, I thought, who gives up a child without a word? Who walks away from someone like Lily? Ella looked down. I didn't walk away. I was pushed. I was medicated, threatened, gaslit. And when I came to my senses, it was too late." David looked at her then, not as a threat, not as an intruder, but as a mother who had suffered in the shadows of her own story. "I don't want to take her," Ella said quickly, as if the words had been waiting trembling on the edge of her breath. "I would never do that. I know what she has now. I see it. She's joyful. She's whole." David's voice softened. "But you miss her." Ella blinked, tears slipping down. "Every day. Even before I found her. I missed someone I wasn't allowed to remember." She reached into her purse and pulled out a letter creased and worn. "I wrote this the night they took her," she said. "I meant to give it to her one day, but I never got the chance." David unfolded it slowly. The ink had smudged slightly, as if touched by tears long dried. "My hope. If someone is reading this to you one day, it means you've grown into someone wonderful. I won't take credit for that, but I hope you'll know I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second. I named you Hope because that's what you were to me, the part of my life that told me light was still possible, that love could still survive the storm. I wasn't strong enough to keep you, but I pray I was strong enough to let you go with love." David read the final line aloud, barely above a whisper. "Wherever you are, I hope you feel me in the wind that calls you home." The silence that followed was sacred. No questions, no explanations, just truth. David looked at Ella, and in his eyes there was no more suspicion, only a deep, weary kind of grace. "I don't know what this means," he said honestly. "I don't know how we move forward." "Neither do I," she replied. "I'm not asking for answers. Only the chance to be near her, not as her mother, just as someone who cares." David nodded slowly. "She's old enough to ask questions," he said. "One day she'll want to know who she looks like, why she remembers a story she's never been told. I won't hide this from her forever." Ella straightened. "When that day comes, I'll be whatever she needs. Nothing more." David folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. "You already are," he said. "You're someone she instinctively trusts. That counts for more than biology ever could." Outside, the snow was still falling soft and unhurried. Inside, something else had begun to thaw. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding, and with it the possibility fragile and tentative of something they might build. Together, in the open, for Lily, and for all the days they could no longer get back but maybe could learn to honor. The snow had stopped, but the hush it left behind lingered like a memory. David stood at the kitchen sink drying a mug with deliberate slowness, his mind elsewhere. The letter from Ella sat on the kitchen table behind him, folded with care, its weight still heavy in his chest. Upstairs, Lily's footsteps padded along the hallway, then the creak of her bedroom door followed by the familiar thump of her running down the stairs. "Morning, Bug," David said, keeping his tone light. "Morning," she chirped, hopping onto the bar stool and rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Guess what?" I dreamed David raised a brow. "You were flying through the sky on a giant marshmallow." She giggled. "No, silly, I was a cloud again. But this time the wind was singing. It knew my name." David's hands paused on the towel. He turned slowly. She said, "Hope." That was my name in the dream. The towel slipped from his hands. Lily blinked up at him, head tilted. "Isn't that funny?" David crouched beside her, heart thudding. "Lily, you remember that name?" She nodded. Not from before, just from inside. He swallowed hard. There was no preparing for this moment. No perfect script, no fatherly manual for how to explain to a child that life is more complex than bedtime stories. "Can I tell you something important?" he asked gently. Lily's eyes widened. She nodded. David reached for her small hand, wrapping it in both of his. "You know how I always tell you families are made from love, not just from who we're born?" "Two." She nodded, slowly attentive, now sensing the shift in tone. "Well," he continued, "there's someone who loved you before I ever met you. Someone who carried you in her heart, even when she couldn't carry you in her arms." Lily's lips parted. "Her name is Ella," he said softly. "And she's the one who gave you the name Hope." Lily's brows knitted. Miss Ella David nodded. Lily looked down, processing. "So, she's my first mom." David hesitated. "She's the mother who gave you life, yes. But I'm still your dad, Bug. Nothing will ever change that." She looked up, eyes searching his. "Did she give me away?" "No," he said firmly. "That's what I used to think. But it's not the truth. She was taken from you. She was hurting. And people made decisions that weren't fair to her or to you." Lily was quiet for a long time. David let her sit with it. Then she asked, "Does she still love me?" He couldn't keep the emotion from his voice. "So much." She never stopped. Lily nodded. Just once. Then she slid down from the stool and walked over to the living room window. Outside, frost clung to the glass, but sunlight was starting to break through. David joined her in silence. After a minute, she said, "Can I see her?" His chest ached. "You can, if you want to." Lily turned her voice suddenly small. "But I don't have to go live with her, right?" David knelt again, looked her straight in the eyes. "No, you're my daughter, always. This isn't about changing that. It's just about letting love be bigger than we thought." She nodded, then wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tightly. "I love you, Daddy." His throat closed. "I love you more than anything." That afternoon, Ella was sitting on the park bench near the frozen fountain in town, her breath curling into the cold air, a book unopened in her lap. She hadn't expected a call. Not today, not this soon. But her phone buzzed. A text. "David, she knows." Ella's heart stopped. Her hands shook. Another message. "David, she wants to see you. Are you free now?" Ella blinked back tears and typed, "Yes, I'll be there in 10. When Ella arrived at the inn, she paused just inside the lobby, uncertain again, until she heard the softest voice from behind the armchair. "Hi, Miss Ella." Ella turned slowly. Lily stood there, hands folded in front of her. Her favorite blue sweater slightly rumpled, a cautious smile on her face. Ella bent to her knees. "Hi, Lily," she whispered. There was a beat of silence between them, thick and fragile. Then Lily asked, "Can I call you Miss Hope instead?" Ella's breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she nodded, eyes filling. "You can call me whatever feels right to you." Lily stepped forward and without another word wrapped her arms around Ella's neck. Ella held her carefully, reverently, as if afraid she'd disappear. David watched from the counter, heart pounding. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Something bigger than understanding was passing between them, something ancient and unnameable. Not just reunion, but recognition. That evening they all sat in the lounge. Ella read aloud from The Cloud That Came Back. Lily curled beside her David, close by, listening with the kind of stillness that only comes when something long broken finally begins to heal. As Ella closed the book, Lily yawned and whispered, "Maybe next time you can bring a story that's happy all the way through." Ella smiled. "I think maybe we're writing one right now." David looked over at her, something soft flickering behind his eyes. For the first time, the word "we" didn't sound complicated. It sounded like hope. The sun had just begun to set, brushing the snow-covered town in pale gold and lavender when David pulled the car into the school parking lot. It was Friday, the day of the winter showcase. The lot was full of bundled-up parents and excited children, the air laced with the scent of cinnamon and anticipation. Inside, the gymnasium rows of folding chairs faced a modest stage wrapped in twinkle lights and hand-drawn snowflakes. It was simple, sweet, and exactly the kind of community event that Lily loved. She had been practicing her song for weeks. But this evening, something else pulsed beneath the surface. Tonight, Ella was coming not as a stranger or a visitor, but for the first time, as someone invited. David spotted her before she saw him. She stood just outside the entrance, nervously adjusting her scarf, holding a small paper program like it might tear in her hands. The ambient sound of laughter and movement seemed to float around her without touching her. He walked over. "You made it." Ella turned. Her smile was tight, unsure. Wasn't going to miss it. David gave a small nod. "She's in the second act." Ella glanced toward the door. "She asked if I could sit near you." His eyes softened. "Then you should." Inside, they found a pair of seats near the front. Ella sat gingerly, her back straight, hands clasped in her lap. David leaned over slightly. "You okay?" She nodded, though her voice trembled. "I feel like I'm trespassing on something sacred." He looked around at the families, the decorations made of construction paper, the off-key piano warming up. Nothing about this is sacred, just heartfelt. She turned to him. "That's exactly what makes it feel sacred." The lights dimmed. Applause rippled through the room as the showcase began, children singing, stumbling through poetry, giggling through dance numbers. The audience responded with kindness even when performances faltered. It was imperfect, genuine joy. And then Lily stepped onto the stage. David held his breath. She was dressed in a simple white dress, her hair tied back with a blue ribbon. She held a small mic and waited for the music to cue. Ella's hand pressed over her heart. The first notes played a soft melody from The Cloud That Came Back. Not the published version. The one Ella had handwritten in her journal years ago. The one Lily had found comfort in before she even knew who'd written it. And then Lily sang, "If the wind should lose its way, I'll wait right here, I'll never stray. For clouds may wander soft and slow, but home is where the love will grow." Her voice was fragile, clear, and just slightly shy, but it carried. Every word landed like snowfall. David blinked back tears. Next to him, Ella was trembling. Her shoulders shook with each line, but she didn't cry loudly. Her expression was one of disbelief reverence. A mother hearing her daughter sing their story out loud in a room full of people who had no idea what it meant. As the song ended, applause burst through the gym. Lily gave a small curtsy and waved. Her eyes scanned the room and found them. She smiled just for them. After the showcase, as families crowded around to take photos and give hugs, Lily came barreling down the bleachers straight into Ella's arms. "You sang like an angel," Ella whispered. "I was thinking of the clouds," Lily said. "And of you." David approached a quiet strength beside them. "You've got a fan club now." Lily looked up at him. "Can we go get hot chocolate with Miss Hope?" He smiled. "You read my mind." Later that night, the three of them sat at a corner table in the town's little coffee shop, sipping warm drinks beneath hanging Edison bulbs and garlands of pine. Lily sat between them, contentedly munching a snowman cookie. When she dashed off to use the bathroom, David turned to Ella. "You okay?" Ella nodded. "That was more than I ever dreamed. I didn't think she'd want me there, let alone sing something like that. She doesn't fully understand everything yet," David said. "But what she does understand is love. She feels it. She recognizes yours." Ella's eyes shimmered. "I didn't come into this expecting anything. No titles, no roles. I just wanted to see her smile." David stirred his coffee. "You gave her that story, Ella. It became something she clung to before she even knew you. I think somehow part of you was with her all along." Ella looked down. "Do you ever think it's too much letting me be here in her life?" He considered the question carefully. "I think life gave her two people who love her in different ways." And I think he paused. "If we let her decide what to do with that love, she'll be okay." Ella let out a shaky breath. "I can be a quiet presence," she said. "The person who shows up for the recitals and reads stories and writes letters, even if she doesn't read them all at once." David looked at her more deeply now. "I think maybe you don't have to stay in the background." Her brow furrowed. He continued, "Maybe there's space for you to be more than just a visitor. Maybe we don't define what this is yet. Maybe we just let it grow." Her eyes filled again, but this time not from grief. "Are you sure I'm sure of one thing?" David said quietly. "She's happiest when we're both in the room." A pause. Then Ella smiled, one not tinged with sorrow, not guarded with guilt. A real smile. And just then Lily returned, sliding into her seat and reaching for her cocoa. "Did I miss anything?" David and Ella shared a glance. "No," Ella said softly. "You're exactly where you're supposed to be." Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and quiet and steady. Inside, for the first time in years, no one was waiting for the storm to pass. They were already home. The night of the winter showcase had settled something in all of them. Not with words, not even with formal decisions, but with warmth. A shared breath. A collective, quiet agreement. We don't know what this is yet, but it matters. In the days that followed, life continued as it always did. Lily returned to school. David resumed his late shifts. Ella kept her distance but stopped hiding in it. She no longer lingered on the edges of the parking lot or waited until dusk to drop things off. She came during the day, often just to sit and talk with Lily by the front desk or to read aloud with her in the lounge while David filed reports at the counter, pretending not to listen, even as his heart did. Still, it wasn't simple. David often found himself staring out the window, coffee growing cold in his hands, wondering what the right shape of this new life should be. He was a man who liked structure roles boundaries. But this didn't have a name. He was Lily's father, and Ella was more than anything he had words for. One evening, Lily broke the silence as they sat together in the living room stringing popcorn for the Christmas tree. "Daddy." "Yeah, Bug." "Can I tell you a secret?" He smiled, threading a fresh piece. "You know I love secrets." She leaned close and whispered, "I think Miss Hope should come live closer." David's fingers paused. "She has a cozy voice," Lily added. "And when she laughs, it sounds like something I remember even though I don't know why." David looked at her for a long moment, and in that small, innocent suggestion, something inside him shifted. Maybe the shape of love wasn't fixed. Maybe it was something you built from scratch like a new treehouse or a song. Maybe it wasn't about whose name was on the birth certificate. Maybe it was about who showed up and kept showing up even when things were hard. It was 2 nights before Christmas when Ella received the invitation. It wasn't from David. It wasn't even from Lily. It was from the town's elementary school, slid into her mailbox in a red envelope with snowflake stickers. Inside, a printed flyer with Lily's class holiday program schedule, and at the bottom, in careful handwriting, "Please sit in the front row. You're part of this too now." Ella stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. For so long she had asked herself if she had the right to even see her daughter. Now her daughter was inviting her into the story. Not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. The night of the performance, the school gym buzzed with parents in festive sweaters and clumsy Santa hats. Children darted around with glitter still clinging to their faces. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling, spinning gently in the warmth. David saved her a seat beside him. When Ella arrived, he rose not awkwardly but like a man meeting someone who mattered, and took her coat. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, cheeks flushed from the cold. She looked both nervous and radiant. "Thank you," she whispered, taking her seat beside him. "You don't have to thank me," David said. "This is yours too." The lights dimmed. The chatter quieted. Lily's class was last. Ella sat still through the earlier acts, though David noticed the way her fingers twisted in her lap, the way she blinked more often than usual. Then Lily appeared on stage. She was wearing a silver dress and a hand-knitted scarf, and when the spotlight hit her, she didn't flinch. She stepped to the microphone with the poise of someone far older than 7. "I want to sing a song that my friend wrote a long time ago," she said clearly. "But I think it was meant for now." David stiffened slightly. Ella's breath caught. Then Lily began to sing, not the cloud song this time, but a new one, her own. Sometimes love starts quiet, a whisper in the night. Sometimes love comes broken, but still it finds the light. I thought I was just lucky to have one heart to hold. But then I found another A story still untold. And now I've got 2 voices that call me when I'm scared. I didn't know it earlier, but love is just what's shared. By the last line, the audience was silent. Even the kids who had fidgeted moments earlier sat still. David's hands were clenched together. Ella sat perfectly motionless except for the tears rolling down her face. When the applause finally erupted, Lily looked straight at them, first to David, then to Ella, and gave a smile that didn't need translation. David wiped his eyes and leaned toward Ella. "She wrote that last verse last night," he whispered. Ella nodded too, overcome to speak. Outside, the 3 of them walked quietly through the crisp air, their breath fogging in front of them. Lily walked between them, each hand holding one of theirs. A triangle. A bond. Not perfect, not conventional, but whole. At the car, Lily turned to Ella. "Will you come for Christmas morning?" she asked, eyes hopeful. David looked at Ella, uncertain how she would answer. Ella crouched, meeting Lily at eye level. "I would love that," she said. Then Lily whispered, "Maybe we can write a new story together." Ella smiled through tears. "I think we already are." David stood in silence, heart full. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man trying to protect something fragile. He felt like a man watching something grow stronger. Together, they were rewriting what love could look like. And in doing so, they were finally finding their way home. The snow had melted in patches by New Year's Day. Outside the Crestwood Inn, the rooftops still held a soft glaze of frost, but the sidewalks shimmered wet under the late morning sun. Icicles dripped steadily from the eaves, ticking like a slow clock. Inside the inn was quiet, its lobby filled with the scent of pine from the small tree David and Lily had decorated just after Thanksgiving. A few stray ornaments still clung to its branches, one of them a felt cloud, with glittering thread sewn through it. Lily had stitched it herself. Upstairs, room 211 had been reopened. Officially, it was now used as a guest suite again. But unofficially, it had taken on a new kind of weight, no longer a room of mystery, but a room that held memory, reunion, and healing. That morning, Lily stood in the doorway of room 211 holding a small notebook in her arms. She wore fuzzy socks and a cardigan several sizes too big one Ella had lent her. David leaned in the hallway watching his daughter with the quiet awe that had come to define this chapter of his life. "Ready?" he asked. Lily looked over her shoulder and nodded. "Can we do it together?" He smiled. "Of course." They stepped into the room together and David closed the door behind them. Inside, Ella was already there, seated on the window bench, sunlight falling across her lap. Her eyes lit up when she saw them. "I brought the story," Lily announced, holding the notebook high. Ella sat straighter. "The one you've been writing?" Lily nodded. "I finished it last night. I want to read it with both of you here." David and Ella sat side by side on the edge of the bed while Lily climbed into the armchair near the window. She opened the notebook with reverence. "It's called The Girl Who Had Two Winds." Ella blinked emotion flickering across her face. Lily began to read. Once there was a little girl made of light and laughter. She had been carried into the world by a strong wind named Hope. But when she was born, Hope got lost in the clouds and the girl didn't know where she came from. Another wind came soft and strong. His name was Steady. He picked up the girl and wrapped her in warmth. He gave her stories and pancakes and the feeling of home. For a while, that's all the girl knew. But sometimes at night she would hear a whisper, a wind she didn't remember but that somehow remembered her. One day the girl followed that whisper, and she found hope again. But instead of being torn between the winds, she realized something beautiful. She didn't have to choose. The winds had chosen her. Lily looked up then. "It's not finished," she added, "but I think I'll keep writing it as we go." David blinked hard, his throat tight. He glanced at Ella, who sat perfectly still, one hand pressed gently to her heart, tears on her cheeks, but smiling. "That's the most beautiful story I've ever heard," she whispered. Lily beamed. Later that evening, the three of them shared a quiet dinner leftover stew, warm bread, and a soft jazz record spinning on the player in the corner. No fanfare, no grand declarations, just a sense of ease. David cleared the dishes while Ella helped Lily braid her hair for bed. It was something Ella had done a few times now, small, gentle acts that once might have felt like oversteps but now simply felt like care, like family. When Lily finally fell asleep, curled under a blanket with her notebook beside her pillow, David walked Ella to the door. The night was cold but clear, the stars like frost scattered across black velvet. Ella hesitated, coat in hand. "I still don't know what this is." "What we're doing." David exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Neither do I." She looked up at him. "Is that okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it is. We're building something none of us were taught how to build. That takes time." A pause. "Room 211 used to be the place I avoided," he added. "Now it's where I found the missing piece." Ella smiled faintly. "Funny, I thought it was where I'd left everything behind. But maybe it was just waiting." David looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. Not romantic tension, not obligation, but acceptance, respect, a quiet mutual recognition of the scars and strengths they each carried. He opened the door for her, then paused. "You'll come back tomorrow." Ella hesitated only a second. Then, "Yes, if that's still okay." "It is." She stepped into the night, pulling her coat tighter, the crisp air kissing her cheeks. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She already knew the way. And upstairs in room 211, the storybook remained on Lily's nightstand. The wind outside the window stirred lightly, playfully. Not lost, not stormy, just returning again and again to the place where it was always meant to be. home. Sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it comes with wounds and questions, but when it's real, when it stays, heals, and grows, it becomes more than a bond. It becomes a second chance. And that, perhaps, is the most beautiful kind of love there is. We'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. We're always amazed by how far these stories travel. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new release. We share stories that inspire hope, healing, and the quiet strength of everyday people every single week. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and stay with us.